Iceland isn't all waterfalls and rainbows. Today I'm going to be breaking down the 5 worst things about traveling Iceland. And just to keep things balanced, I'm also going to include some of my favorite things about traveling the country so that you don't come out with a overly jaded view. To kick things off, let's talk about one of the biggest complaints from both locals and tourists alike, which is the weather. While Iceland is pretty small, you'll still get a pretty wide variation of weather depending on where you are in the country. But just so that you have a point of reference, in Reykjavik, the average temperature in the winter is around 34 degrees Fahrenheit, and in the summer it's around 54 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's never really that warm in Iceland. It's a lot more temperate and it feels a lot like fall here in the US. While the temperatures aren't usually that extreme, the factors that cause the most issues for people would be the rain and the wind. While it's not constantly raining in Iceland, they do get a lot of rain. Their rainy season lasts around 7.5 months from the end of August to the beginning of April. During the season, there's a more than 42% chance that it'll be raining on any given day. So if you're planning your trip and you're not down for the rain, you'll want to keep this in mind. Wind is another factor to consider. It can make you feel a lot more cold and it can get very windy in Iceland. So windy, in fact, that our camper van rental company told everyone to park facing towards the wind so that when you open the doors, the wind wouldn't tear them off or damage the car. The bottom line is, if you're headed to Iceland, you want to be prepared for the weather by having waterproof and wind-resistant clothing. It's also a good idea to have some thermal base layers that you can put on if things start to get really cold. So the weather was my first negative. My first positive would just be how long the days last in the summertime. One of the unique things about Iceland is that the sun barely sets in the summertime. In June and July, it's virtually light outside all of the time. While this can be a little annoying when it comes to sleeping, it's great if you want to make the most of the time that you have traveling. You never have to worry about running out of daylight while you're checking out the sights. If you're not a big fan of running into lots of other tourists as you're visiting attractions, you could even reorient your whole sleeping schedule so that you're up while other people are asleep, so you can check out sites with just fewer crowds. Another one of the worst things about traveling Iceland is just how difficult the language is. So Icelandic is rated as one of the most difficult languages for English speakers to learn. And this is totally understandable when you start driving around and trying to read and pronounce the road signs. A couple of reasons this language can be so hard for native English speakers to grasp is because some of the syllables are pronounced totally differently from what we're used to. And to make matters worse, a lot of the words are really, really long. So if you're interested in talking to locals in Icelandic, you'll want to start brushing up well in advance. While the language is really difficult, another one of the great things about Iceland is that just about everyone knows English. English is a mandatory subject in Icelandic primary schools, so they begin learning the language from a very young age, meaning that most of them have absolutely no problem conversing with you in English. Another drawback of traveling in Iceland would be the driving laws. If you've got a need for speed, Iceland probably isn't the place for you. After driving all the way around the country, the fastest speed limit I saw was about 55 miles per hour or 90 kilometers an hour. And if you're thinking that you could just speed and get away with it, that's not a good idea because they have a lot of speed cameras beside the roads that will send you a ticket when you get back home. When speeding, you also run the risk of hitting a sheep. There are a lot of sheep in Iceland that roam freely on the land, and a lot of times they end up in the roads. And so if you're not paying attention or you're driving too fast, there's a very high chance that you could hit a sheep, and if you do so, you can be hit with a really large fine from the farmer that owns the sheep. My next favorite thing about traveling in Iceland is just that everywhere you go, there's beautiful nature to be seen. While on some road trips, driving might feel a little bit like a chore, in Iceland, this wasn't the case for us just because we had so much fun taking in the scenery as we drove. From waterfalls to volcanoes to glaciers to beaches, Iceland has it all, and it's so much fun exploring this country by car. Another of the worst things about traveling Iceland is just how expensive it is. There are a lot of reasons that Iceland is more expensive than many other countries you'll visit. One of the biggest reasons would be that there's an 11% VAT tax on any food that you buy, and for goods other than food, this tax goes up to 24%. While a lot of countries in Europe have this VAT tax, it's much higher in Iceland. In addition to this, Iceland only produces around 65% of its food. The rest of it is imported into the country, and there are a lot of costs that come with importing food. And a lot of times those additional costs are pushed off onto the consumers. Something interesting about Iceland though is while it might feel expensive for you, it doesn't feel quite as expensive for locals because their minimum wage starts at around $15 an hour, which is much higher than a lot of other countries. So another good thing about traveling Iceland would just be how well maintained the roads are there. We stuck to the main ring road that goes all the way around the country for most of our trip, and we were happy to find that it's in very good condition, very easy to drive on. You just have to watch out for sheep, and I believe it's only ever single lane. There are some roads called F roads that are more towards the center of Iceland. If you start going on those, you'll find that they can be very rough. A lot of times you'll need an all-terrain vehicle to safely drive on them. If you're renting a car or van, they should tell you whether or not your car is allowed to drive on those roads. So another bad thing about living in or traveling in Iceland will just be the limited product variety. If you expect to find all of your favorite food brands or clothing brands, then think again. Due to the increased costs of importing goods into the country, stores are primarily focused on those staples that they know that they'll be able to sell, which results in just fewer overall different products that are offered. If there are really specific things you need, you may just want to bring them with you from home. My next favorite thing about traveling in Iceland would just be how flexible you can be when you're traveling this country. There are so many camper van rental companies and car rental companies. You have tons of options to choose from. And when you're driving yourself, you have the ability to create your own itinerary. I found this was just so much easier than when I traveled in Europe for 3 months and I was having to worry about train schedules and all of that. So if you can, I would definitely say rent a car or a camper van when you're in Iceland. There are tons of campgrounds throughout the country that provide showers and sinks for doing dishes and little kitchens. If you want an even more luxurious experience, there are lots of Airbnbs and hotels throughout the country. With those, you'll just want to plan a little bit more in advance because I know that they can get booked up, especially in the busier seasons. With the campgrounds, we didn't have to book ahead at all. And so if you're planning more of a last-minute trip, that would definitely be the way to go. I just made a video breaking down our 9-day itinerary, everything that we saw, what we did, the route that we took. If you want some good ideas for your trip, go check that video out. I'll put the link to that in the description. Thanks for watching. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video.